We're talking Memphis Grizzlies. We're talking season preview. We're going to talk about a team that's going to look very different to what they were last season. I know that, you know that, and Michael Bolton knows that.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the world champion of what? I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Yes, the Game Time app. Don't forget, download the app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to save $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms, so give it a thumb, give it a bang, give it a double bang. Leave those comments down below as well. We are here, and we are getting ready to talk Memphis Grizzlies, so we might as well get in and talk Memphis Grizzlies. So, to talk Memphis Grizzlies, who else would I bring in but one of the hosts of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast? And he told me this another time, but I'm sure it's fine for me to say. He said that he much prefers Kansas City barbecue over Memphis barbecue. It is, it's Joe Mullinax from Locked On Grizzlies. That was fine for me to say out loud. Yeah, Joe.
No, don't put that evil on me. I won't be able to ever go back to Memphis if that was the truth. It certainly is not the truth. Memphis is superior to Kansas City and just about any other kind of barbecue, of course.
Well, you have to qualify that just about any. That means you're just hiding something underneath so you don't get harassed back at home. That's all good. I'll keep that secret safe here with me, Joe. So we are here to talk about a Grizzlies team, and we could preview this team, and it's just going to be so many different things compared to where this squad was last year for very obvious reasons, because of injuries, absences, the team, and they figured out that they were going down the barrel early on, and they made those adjustments, and then everything is going to be very different this season. So we'll talk about what is exactly different now. In fact, we'll just have a look at the players that did actually arrive for this squad. Now, they didn't have a huge amount of business through free agency. They draft Zach Edey, obviously, in the top 10. And then otherwise, it's Jalen Wells and Cam Spencer, who's on a two-way. They signed Jay Huff, who was really good at Summer League. He is older. He's on a two-way. Mamadi Diakite comes across as part of the Zaire Williams deal. But there's nothing massive that they did throughout free agency. Sort of focusing, I guess, on getting a lot of those players back that they had who were out last year. The guy that you want to focus on as the biggest addition, I think this one's pretty obvious. We're talking about Zach Edey, the pick at number 9. All the rumors were, Joe, that they were looking at Donovan Clingan and all this talk about trading up, whatever. Zach Edey comes in. He was obviously National College Player of the Year. We didn't really get to see much of him at Summer League. Those of you watching on video can see some of his Summer League stats there. He averaged 10 and 9 with 2.5 blocks, but he barely played. So how big of a role is Edey playing out of the gate here?
I think he's probably going to be the starter. A lot of what I've seen from the Memphis Grizzlies when they've been good, right? And the goal is for them to be good again, of course, is with Steven Adams as their starting center. And if there was a bigger Steven Adams, it might be Zach Edey. Right now, their games aren't exactly the same. I don't want to disrespect Steven Adams as a passer. On a recent episode of Locked On Grizzlies, my co-host Michael Cole and I talked about the chemistry that Desmond Bane and Steven Adams had as a two-man game, but was kind of underappreciated during the time that Adams was in Memphis, and Edey having to recreate that or replicate that in some way, shape, or form, not just with Bane, but with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., and to help those guys maximize their games. I think if you ask him to be Steven Adams 2.0, in theory, he should be better than Steven Adams because he has an offensive game. You mentioned how he was the National College Player of the Year. You could easily argue that he was the most dominant player of the last 2 years in American college basketball, and you could potentially extend that to the 21st century. Right now, I don't know if I'm ready for that conversation, but I do think the numbers warrant him being in that conversation if it were to happen. So he has the size, obviously. That's the main thing that people focus on. He has incredibly soft hands in terms of catching the ball around the basket. He has really nice touch. We saw glimpses of that in Summer League, but you definitely saw it while he was in college. And he is going to be able to do things offensively as a scorer, especially with bench units that kind of make me excited. I don't think he's going to get a bunch of his back to the basket touches when he's out there with Morant and Bane and Jackson Jr. and Marcus Smart. I know we'll talk about projected starting fives here in a little bit. He's not going to get a bunch of shots up then, but when he's out there with 2 or 3 reserved and he's the second offensive option, I could see him doing a lot of similar things in short spurts to what he did at Purdue. He's not going to be asked to be that 40 minutes in the national championship guy, though. He's going to be asked to play 25 to 28 minutes a night. He's going to be asked to defend and allow for Jaren Jackson Jr. to be that off-ball defender. He's going to set massive screens for John Morant and allow for him to have so much room to work with out on the perimeter in terms of penetration. The two-man game with Desmond Bane, as he's grown as a creator off the dribble, it's also something to be excited about. So I see him fitting as the starter. I don't see him playing massive minutes. I see him sliding into that Steven Adams role with a touch of the ability to score for 6 to 8 minutes a night when he's asked to as a second leading option, perhaps with a bench mob kind of mentality. And I see him being someone who, if you have rookie of the year bets, he makes a lot of sense because he's going to be on a good team. He's going to be given opportunity to contribute right away, and he's ready to contribute right away. Like, I wanted Donovan Clingan pretty badly, but if you look at the two players, Clingan, while he may be ready to play, is not as ready as Zach Edey. If you were going to take a big in this draft that you needed to put on a team that's trying to contend, you could easily argue Zach Edey makes the most sense, and I would imagine that the Grizzlies would make that argument.
They could. I don't think either of them are ready to help in a huge way, honestly. Like, there are significant downsides to both of those players. And one of the things with Edey is he had like an 86% free throw rate in college, and he's just never going to do that in the NBA. And we already see that in Summer League. His usage went from 33 down to 17. And that's part of the reason I think where people get really excited about looking at Edey from a fantasy point of view is they look at the numbers. But this might be one of the largest, I think, college to rookie year usage cuts that we've seen almost ever. Like, he will go from 30 plus, one of the leading usage guys, to a guy that is well below average. Because like you said, when he's playing with those starters, he's not touching it. Like, there'd be zero reason to be force-feeding your touches to Edey when all these other guys exist. You're right, in that second unit, there's certain situations. But I also think, we know there's concerns. I don't want to harp on about Edey too much here, but defensive issues and perhaps concerns. The thing that I worry a little bit about the minutes, I agree with the 25, but I look at 25 probably lower because I think that you can run lineups with Brandon Clark. You can run lineups with Vince Williams playing at the 4 up a little bit as well to give a little bit more a dynamism and space that means they don't have to rely on huge minutes there for Zach Edey. So it'll be really interesting to see how they play that, because in the past, Joe, we've spoken about how Taylor Jenkins did not like playing Jaren Jackson at center, but last year they went into that way more than what they have in the past. So I'm going to be really intrigued to see the direction they go with that this season. But there is a flip side to that of guys that disappeared off the team, or the guys that they lost. And honestly, it's a big list, and I asked you, who's the biggest loss, and you said nobody, and it's right. Like, who cares? Zaire Williams is gone. Yuta Watanabe has gone back to Japan. Lamar Stevens, Jordan Goodwin, and Trey Jemison were starting games down the stretch. We talked about this team. Was just packed it in and was cycling through legends like Malginha Pereira and tool-time Timmy Allen, and it doesn't matter. None of these guys were going to be in the rotation anyway. They're all gone. Fine. Like, I don't think there's anything that's major we need to discuss with those guys, but we do have other things that we do need to discuss, and we are going to get to those in a second. But first of all, I got to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. You want tickets for sporting events? Maybe it's Major League Baseball, because Game Time has those tickets. It's an official ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. Game Time has those tickets there, and the closer you get to Game Time, very, very conveniently named app, the closer you get to Game Time, the tickets pricing goes down. They've got all-in pricing. They've got views from your seat. They've got so many different features that they have the zone deals where you just pick an area and they just said, don't worry, big fella, I'm going to pick that seat for you, and you're going to save money doing that. Now, Joe, there's obviously no Major League Baseball team, so you can't do the MLB tickets through Game Time, but we've got, who's the Memphis Sounds? Is that the minor league baseball team around Memphis? Who's the Sounds? That's Nashville Sounds. No, Joe. I know this. There is a sounds for baseball too. I remember, but there is a Nashville Sounds minor league baseball team, and there's the Memphis Redbirds. So fair. Get them out of here. But whatever tickets you want, Game Time has those tickets available for you. So head across and download the Game Time app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and you get $20 off your first purchase. Download the app, Game Time. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Game Time. Last bit of tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. So we've talked Game Time. We've talked key additions. We've talked guys that are out of here. Now it's time for us to talk about the projected starting five. And we've touched on this a little bit already, Joe. Let's just get straight into it. Your projected starting five is basically exactly the same as how I'm projecting that out. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson, and Zach Edey. There will be people who are watching this who will be looking out there and going, where's GG Jackson? There will be people looking at this and going, what about Brandon Clark? What about Vince Williams? And for a team that was as banged up as they were last year, there are plenty of different options here. I think this is very clearly the smartest lineup to go for. I do want to focus here a little bit on Jaren Jackson, who saw a massive change in his, overall game profile. The 2-point percentage fell off. The block numbers disappeared. He was playing more center than power forward. But I think we've seen, much like people saw with Mikal Bridges in Brooklyn, that Jaren as a number one option doesn't work. But now, can we see more of a return to the type of game that Jaren was playing 2 years ago with, most likely these other players in their positions for more than 9 games?
I don't know that I would fully agree that Jaren as a number one option doesn't work. I think at this stage of his career, Jaren as a 5 doesn't work. Long term, it'd be phenomenal to see. I think he projects out because you got to remember he's still 25 years old, something along those lines. He's played a lot of NBA basketball, but he's still entering his prime. I'd love to see him rebound better, but at some point you call a spade, and you just acknowledge that's not a strength of his game. When Jaren Jackson Jr. won the Defensive Player of the Year, he was not a 5, he was a 4, and he was doing that alongside of Steven Adams, which is why I mentioned Zach Edey so heavily earlier in the show. Nobody wants Zach Edey to succeed more than Jaren Jackson Jr. because Jaren Jackson Jr., especially on the defensive end, but now that he has this renewed offensive development, or it's not necessarily renewed, it's a new development that he has this ability to score and be that isolation dominant player against mismatches. There were times throughout the season last time around that Jaren Jackson Jr. was one of the best ISO scorers in the entire National Basketball Association. That hadn't been the case before. So when he's a 4, you either have a stretch 4 who isn't big enough to defend him, or you have a true 4 who's too big and he's not going to be able to fast enough to handle him off the dribble on the perimeter. It's seeking those mismatches and being aggressive with them that Jaren Jackson Jr. has struggled with in the past. That was not the case this past season. Desmond Bane, certainly Ja Morant, their absences allowed for Jaren to kind of find his footing in that way and be that lead option. So it's going to be nice to see him alongside Ja again and alongside Dez again. Marcus Smart as a secondary or tertiary defender. Love Marcus Smart. That's a guy that makes winning plays. Draymond Green used to talk about the 16-game player. Memphis plans on being in the Western Conference Finals this coming season, and you need guys like Marcus Smart on your roster if you're going to compete for that sort of thing. He needs to be able to fit alongside those players and maximize what he's best at. And I think that this starting lineup for Jaren is a dream come true because of the dribble creation and penetration of Ja Morant. Desmond Bane meshing that with the 3-point shot, the all-around versatility of Marcus Smart, the ability to be a defensive stopper. He's not the Marcus Smart of 2 years ago, but he's still an above-average defensive player on the perimeter. And then, of course, Edey closing up the paint makes Jaren that free safety type like in football where he can roam center field or the middle of the field, whatever sport you want to use that isn't basketball, and come and if Ja makes a mistake on a rotation, which happens sometimes, if Bane gets blown by, which happens every once in a while, Dez is improved as a defender, Jaren can correct those mistakes instead of being the point man on rotations and having to be that last line of defense like he was when he was playing center. So the Edey starting insertion instead of a Brandon Clark makes that cleaner because Jaren is a true 4 in that reality. Starting Marcus Smart instead of a Vince Williams Jr., we saw Vince Williams Jr. do some facilitation things, but we haven't seen it at the highest level of winning like Marcus Smart has done it in the past. Marcus Smart, true point guard, not so good. Marcus Smart being that secondary kind of creator, that works a lot better, and I think Jaren is a perfect kind of mediation point between those two spaces.
The bench is going to be intriguing as well. So these are the guys you're expecting to be as part of the rotation. I, again, have no real argument there. We've got Luke Kennard recently re-signed. Vince Williams Jr., GG Jackson, Santi Aldama, and Brandon Clark. Clark was solid enough coming back from his Achilles at the end of last season. I guess the one I just want to talk about here is GG Jackson because we saw him come in. He's incredibly young still. He hasn't turned 20 yet. He hasn't turned 20 until December. He probably would have been a top 5 pick in this draft is my guess. He's still significant holes in his game, efficiency and anything that's not taking a lot of shots, and now he's got to try and fit into a real team because we know this, so that team wasn't a real team last year. They weren't trying to do anything else apart from just sort of get through the year and try some different things out.
Yes.
So I believe JJ's role is going to be pretty small this season, assuming this team is healthy because coming off the bench, Kennard and Vince and Santi and all these guys are probably going to get more minutes. But this is, I guess, the development year that GG didn't fully have last season is more going to be the part of where we are here, I think, now, just because of the other guys who are ahead of him. He wasn't that good where he pushes all these guys aside. He sort of has to now go back to the back of the line.
The great irony of GG Jackson is, and I know you've followed the Grizzlies going all the way back to the grit and grind era like I did, Josh, that Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, Tony Allen crew, they were dying for a small forward that could score. And now that Memphis has it in GG Jackson, there's a segment of the fan bases that it says, why isn't GG Jackson starting? You've got that guy now. Well, GG Jackson isn't starting for the exact reason that you just outlined. He doesn't pass the basketball. He's a ball stopper. He is a scorer of the basketball, which Memphis has also needed since the days of OJ Mayo, right? Like they've needed a guy that can score the ball off the bench. But at the same time, he's not able to facilitate consistently yet. He is a better rebounder than he gets credit for. And I think where GG can find some minutes, the 5 bench names that you listed off there, and Taylor Jenkins has shown that he's willing to go 10 deep in the rotation. So I certainly think those 5 guys will get minutes. But you're correct in assuming that Gigi's kind of that 9th or 10th guy at the moment. Luke Kennard just signed an $11 million or almost $11 million, depending on which report you believe. He's going to play, right? He didn't sign that contract to not see minutes, and he's also one of the top 10 3-point shooters, I would argue, in the history of the NBA. He's going to play. Brandon Clark is going to play, right? He's their true third big. If you watch Santi Aldama in the Olympics, it's hard to imagine him not being on the court. Vince Williams Jr., tremendous defender this past season, has shown the propensity to be a scorer from beyond the arc. He fits in like a glove in terms of being a core glue guy that can play next to these starters in addition to being a role player. Obviously, the main question is backup point guard. Bane probably eats some of those minutes. Unfortunately, Marcus Smart probably eats some of those minutes. We know who's not going to eat some of those minutes, and that's GG Jackson, because GG Jackson is not a creator of offense for others at this stage of his development. I would love to see him kind of supplant Santi Aldama because you're not going to be able to extend all these guys, right? Like my co-host, Michael Cole, has the theory that they signed Kennard to a 1-year deal because they have Cam Spencer on a 2-way, and that he sees Kennard not being re-signed this time next year. They convert Cam Spencer to a full 4-year contract, and they hope that Spencer can replicate some of what Luke Kennard can do after a year of development. Because money's going to get tight for the Grizzlies. Jaren Jackson Jr. is due a contract extension soon, and it's probably going to be not a discount like the last one was. Ja and Desmond Bane are both on their rookie max extensions. So as money gets tighter for a small market team, you got to find ways to make that money fit. And GG Jackson signed basically a 3-year contract. That's not necessarily a worry with him at the moment, but he needs to find himself as a facilitator of offense for others. And he also needs to be able to grow as a defender and a rebounder in that combo forward position, because you may not be able to afford Santi Aldama if he has a big season this year. So much like Cam Spencer, but maybe in a higher level situation, I think you'll see G.G. Jackson get opportunity, not nearly as much opportunity as he had last year, as you alluded to earlier. That was a bad basketball team, and he was getting empty stats. There's a decent chance, and you would know this better than me, Josh, you're the expert. G.G. Jackson probably won some dudes some fantasy basketball leagues last year because they randomly added him, and he was putting up 40 points in garbage time games and helping guys to their league championship. He wasn't helping the Grizzlies win. When you're trying to play winning basketball, the way that GG is dominant right now is not as helpful. And unless he develops his game, he's not going to see minutes unless he's that 9th or 10th guy, maybe playing 12 minutes a night.
Yeah, like the scoring part is there for sure, but even that for fantasy, he does so little in so many other areas that he wasn't actually like that awesome. Like, he seemed like he could have opportunities, but he didn't quite get there. And that's gonna come. We hope it comes. He's ridiculous. Like, he's like 5 years younger than Cam Spencer, I think. And that's not literally even an exaggeration.
That's not a joke.
He's legitimately 5 years younger than Cam Spencer, who was picked in this year's draft. We've got a lot of stuff we're going to cover in a sec, Joe, but today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That is allegedly the formula for winning championships. I'm sure that's true, but it's also the formula for getting things for your car, keeping your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up for peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, bumper bars that says Joe likes Kansas City barbecue better. All of that is available, maybe, allegedly, over on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts available for your car, you're going to find exactly what you need. And the reassurance you get from their guaranteed fit means that whatever part that you get, you know that is going to fit your car. Because if it doesn't, the guarantee part of the guaranteed fit means that you get your money back. What an amazing concept. So head across and keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, unfortunately, is only available to US customers. All right. So we've gone through that part of the show, and now this is the part that we've got to talk about, the key player on this team, and that is Ja Morant, because obviously had the suspension, came back, played 9 games, and then shoulder injury seemingly out of nowhere. I guess sort of out of nowhere. He was done. Is there any worries about that as we move forward? He's completely healthy now, I'm guessing, Joe?
Yes, he's completely cleared. It was basically an overuse injury. He did a lot of training, obviously, during the suspension when he wasn't able to play. It basically happened, I'm fairly confident, in like a practice workout kind of situation. It was an overuse kind of thing, and he's been fully cleared to participate. He's not going to miss any time going into training camp. None of this matters if Ja Morant can't play, right? You mentioned the 9 games that he did play. They were 6-3, on pace to make the play-in. They probably would have if Ja had stayed healthy and the rest of the team had kept it together as well. They looked just so vastly different with Ja Morant out there. The New Orleans game, his first game back, really stands out. The Los Angeles Lakers game, a Lakers team that people are picking as a dark horse to contend for a championship for some reason.
They shouldn't be doing that.
That Lakers team was dominated by Ja Morant and these Grizzlies. And I do think that people forget not just about the Grizzlies at large, because it's a small market and it's fairly easy, I admit, if you aren't following them every day like me, or if you're not an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, which if you're not, you should be. You should certainly be subscribing. But if you're someone that isn't as familiar with the Memphis Grizzlies, they're relatively easy to forget they're going to be one of the contenders in the West. And somewhat more surprisingly, people have forgotten about what Ja Morant is capable of. He was a guard that led the NBA in paint scoring amongst all players that were eligible, right? That includes Giannis. That includes Nikola Jokic. He was the leading Joel Embiid. He led points or paint scoring a couple years ago in front of all of those guys. This is someone who has the physical ability to completely take over basketball games. And there's only 10 to 12 other people on the planet that can say that. And he had his issues and he had his injury, but that seems to be behind him now. He seems to be in a better place, both physically and mentally. And, Mike Miller, his agent now, which is kind of ironic, former NBA player, Mike Miller is now his agent. And the message has been people are going to remember what Ja Morant is capable of and then some. He's an all-NBA caliber player when he's at his very best. He is on, the Olympics are finishing up. The 2028 Olympic team, Ja Morant will be there if he is at full strength. He is that quality of player. And I do believe that if he doesn't hit, if he's not on the court, we saw what happens, Grizzlies, right? We saw Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. There was no Steven Adams, and that's an important point to make because Adams was important for these Grizzlies, but they were 6-19, I think, during the Morant suspension, and they had Smart, Bane, and Jaren all out there playing. So without John Morant, nothing else matters for this Grizzlies team, and that's especially true when you look at who the backup point guard is, whether it's a Scottie Pippen Jr., who looked really good in Summer League, but he's on a two-way contract. Is he ready for that larger role? Derrick Rose is polarizing in Memphis because there's people that remember him as a Memphis Tiger, and they love D. Rose, and then there's people that didn't experience that, like me, who look at Derrick Rose and are terrified if John Morant goes down. How do they answer that question moving forward? That's one of the reasons Memphis was rumored to be back in the Tyus Jones conversation before he chose Phoenix. Without Morant and his explosiveness offensively, nothing else matters for the Grizzlies. They'll be a middling team. Them being a title contender rests on him being able to be what he needs to be and what he's shown to be, thankfully, in the past.
I think the Scottie Pippen one's interesting because, he's on a two-way. I think he should just be on a full contract and he should just slot in as the backup. I think he's absolutely 100% good enough to be doing that. You're right, Derrick Rose has been washed for 3 years. He's not an NBA rotation caliber player anymore, and you don't want to trust him. I think if Morant is down, they'll have to just use more Marcus Smart there, and that means that the player we're going to talk about now, Vince Williams, is going to have to step up, or would have to step up into a larger role and probably assume that position as the starting small forward, because Williams, who was a former two-way contract player, stepped up into a larger role. He got, unfortunately, just the luck of just another injury for the Grizzlies. Wow, just shocking stuff that kept him out for longer than most people would anticipate. I'm sure that part was definitely coincidental as well. But Vince stepped up. Look at these numbers. They're not fantastic. 28 minutes, 15 usage, but he passed, he defended, he shot, he scored. When he needed to, he ramped it up. When he needed to, he pulled it back. He showed himself at the very minimum, I think, Joe, to be considered a key rotation piece, and I think Vince Williams can be a very clear starter, and that's part of when, again, we go back earlier to the Zach Edey stuff, that if that doesn't work out and Edey's clogging the paint offensively, not just defensively, but offensively, and he's getting cooked defensively, well, he could just come off, and they can go smaller, and Vince can play in there, and Vince can play at the 4, he can play at the 3, he can play at the 2. You've highlighted him as someone to watch this season. What's the next step here for Vince? Because like a lot of these players who stepped up, GG and Vince last season, the natural inclination is they're going to have to step back a bit. So what are we watching for here with Vince Williams?
I think with Vince Williams, it's going to be better than it was or it will be for GG because of what you alluded to with his defense. Now, GG is a better defender than he gets credit for, but Williams is a better defender than GG, and Williams is a better facilitator than GG. If Williams is that guy that becomes a starter, he will fit pretty seamlessly because his game is malleable. He's able to make that extra pass. He's able to see the right play, not just create a shot for himself like GG would do more often than not. He can do that in spurts, but he also can hit the open three. He shot really well in that way. He ran the point at times for the Grizzlies, not a place you want him to be long-term, but he has shown the propensity to be able to do those sorts of things. He has a game that's more malleable, and I think, Team USA, you wonder why Jaylen Brown doesn't get picked. Derek White's the choice, right? I mean, he's a better fit for that roster. Maybe not. Brown is clearly a better player. I think most people would agree, but they went with White because he's a better fit for the roster. Vince Williams Jr. is a better fit for this roster than G.G. Jackson is right now. G.G. Jackson's a better basketball player. I think he's certainly a better scorer of the ball. G.G. Jackson's one of the best young scorers in the entire NBA. But Vince Williams Jr. does more of the things that this Grizzlies team needs as they try to contend again than a G.G. Jackson does. And every time he's been given an opportunity, he's taken advantage of it.
Yep.
His biggest thing has been, I just haven't been given opportunities, going back to VCU and, being at a smaller school, then going to the Summer League, going to that two-way deal you mentioned. Every time he's gotten a chance to move up to the next point of reference, he's taken advantage of it. And I think that there's nothing suggesting that he won't be able to do that moving into next season. So the malleability of his game, his two-way potential as a defender and as a three-point shooter in particular, with a splash of creation off the dribble, he makes more sense in a lot more roster and rotation matchups and combinations than a G.G. Jackson does at this point. Now, that might change. I think G.G. has larger talent, but Vince Williams Jr. has heard that about guys throughout his career, and yet here he is being talked about as a key rotation piece for a team trying to contend for the Western Conference Championship.
Would you say that if Morant or Bane or Smart is out, whether it's resting, a small injury, long-term injury, that Williams is the guy that no matter who it is, he just slides in because other guys can move positions. Like obviously Kennard's there and Pippen's there and Gigi's there and Santi's there to replace a Jaron. But like to me, it's very much like he gets the bulk of these minutes and he is that replacement starter for a large majority of the guys that are currently projected to be starting.
The only exception to that might be somebody like if Bane gets hurt, I could see them going with Luke Kennard for the spacing. You know, Bane is such a perfect fit next to Morant in large part because of his shooting ability. So I could see Kennard being the starter, and obviously that hurts a little bit defensively, but they keep that floor spacing and the importance of Morant offensively at maximum tilt just about because Kennard is a phenomenal three-point shooter. I think if Smart is out, I think it's Vince Williams Jr. I think if Morant is out, I think it's Vince Williams Jr. I think you're right on both of those counts.
Yeah, that's how I say it, obviously, because I wouldn't have said it otherwise. Let's talk about who could be a make or break player for this upcoming season. And I chucked this question out to guests with many different ways of sort of approach that how you wanted, however you wanted to approach it. And that's how you guys, all your hosts, have done so far. Your answer to this question was Santi Aldama, who was given a larger opportunity at times last season with the injuries. He started a lot of games. I thought that he was relatively disappointing for majority of the season. For a guy that, again, we look at him and go, look at this guy. He is a shooting power forward. But to me, he doesn't hit enough. And his free throws became he was a 65% free throw guy. I don't know. There was just, for a guy that should be a good shooter, he was very, very below average in so many areas. And then I failed to see what the advantage was that he was giving to the team outside of just sort of being tall. I thought it was a step back for him when it was a real opportunity to step forward. Now, you've mentioned him playing for Spain in the Olympics. He's a restricted free agent coming up. So I do agree this is make or break for him because he's got to be able to find that real sort of role. Is that unfair of me to say that it was a letdown from him last season?
Not at all. And DeMichael and I have talked about on our show how you watch him play in the NBA and it doesn't make sense. Like it's not like he has an ugly shot, right? It's not like he struggles to find his footing or he has a weird release. It just hasn't clicked for him. And it really shines through in games where the opposing team is longer or more physical, right? Like the Lakers, I've mentioned them earlier, were a terrible matchup for Aldama. Anthony Davis and LeBron ate him alive when LeBron was playing the four. He just didn't have the physical strength. Now you look at Santi Aldama playing for Spain in the Olympics, and he looks like he's put on a little bit of muscle. And this is a guy who is arguably Spain's best player, or was Spain's best player, because Santi didn't continue, obviously. They didn't make the knockouts, I don't believe. But he was Spain's best player in the tournament in pool play. And it was fun to watch him kind of find that confidence because there's no reason if you watch him, his mechanics, the way that he plays, he could be a 37, 38% three-point shooter. It defies logic that he had the step back that he had, aside from not being physically strong enough to contend with other front court players in the NBA. If he can negate that a little bit and can show his value as a shooter, a little bit of a creator off the dribble, not being bullied in terms of rebounding. Because if you go with a true reserve front court of Santi Aldama and Brandon Clark, and Clark is your center, Clark plays more like a center than Santi Aldama does, especially in terms of physicality. If he's not able to rebound in that kind of a lineup with a smaller but bouncier center next to him, what is his role on this Grizzlies team moving forward? I mentioned how Gigi Jackson, in my mind's eye, projecting out to 3 years from now, I could see a Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Vince Williams Jr., Gigi Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr. starting five with Zach Edey coming off the bench or something like that. I see Gigi as a potential 4. He could be a Santi replacement if Santi is not able to get it together. And maybe that's true anyway because of the exact same thing we talked about with Kennard earlier. As money gets tight for these Grizzlies, it's possible Gigi just waiting in the wings in this last year of Santi. And, whether it's restricted free agency, a trade, whatever the case might be, maybe Memphis moves on from him. The Grizzlies are going to have a lot of options. They still have all their own first-round picks. They still have the capacity to do a lot of different kinds of things in terms of trades as the trade deadline gets nearer. And as folks like to point out, coming out of the Zaire Williams trade and re-signing Kennard, they're right around the luxury tax. So are they going to go further into it and try to go all in if their team is better? Are they going to make sure they're out of it if they're underachieving a little bit? It's going to be interesting to watch play out. And I think Aldama is going to be one of the focal points of whether things are going well or not well. It'll be in part because of Santi.
One of the things you touched on earlier today, and I think this is the major storyline of this team, is that there is some people who sort of don't really remember the Grizzlies because they were terrible. Like, look, we could ignore them basically after the first month. Said, oh, they're done, and that's it. Like, we don't care. The major,
and you certainly could after the Morant injury, because again, they were 6-3. Friendly reminder, they were pretty good. They beat the Lakers, they beat the Pelicans. They were doing the things they needed to, barely. It was close, but if Ja Morant had stayed healthy, no one's going to be able to convince me that team doesn't make the play.
They were starting to get better, but then everything sort of compounded. So the major storyline, I think, for this team is staying healthy. Now, look, there are some of these injuries which there is absolutely no doubt that they happened. Like, Morant hurt his shoulder, and Marcus Smart, we saw his finger disappear off the side of his hand at some point, and then we saw Desmond Baines, grade 3 alleged ankle sprain. Then he came back for 2 games, then hurt his back. But I think there is a level of an overstating, because I think that outside of Morant, all those guys were probably available to come back 4 or 5 weeks earlier than either they did or they never returned. Vince Williams, Marcus Smart, most of those guys. But we know why. That's all good. We all wanted to see Malgina Pereira, and we got to. So that's, we class that as a win. So to me, the thing is like staying healthy. And I think that it's not about that team being so banged up. It's like they got hurt. They made the correct managerial decision to keep them out, and now we push forward. So it is a storyline. I don't think it's a major concern necessarily, but what I do have a question here, the burning question for this team, is the Marcus Smart situation, because we didn't get to see these guys play together very much at all. Like, we just didn't. So
9 games.
My burning question is Marcus Smart actually a key part of this team, or is he the guy they're going to be going, how do we upgrade this? Is he long-term for the team? Is he gone this season? Do we need to get a better fit here? Because while he can play the 3 and defend 4s, his defense has slipped, his shooting has fallen off somewhat. Is he like, when they look at this team and go, you say conference finals, do they have that vision of, and Marcus Smart's a part of it, or is he sort of just there until they can figure out what to do next?
I think they have a vision that he's part of it. Now, I'm not entirely sold. Like, if Utah and Danny Ainge all of a sudden said, hey, Memphis, you've got a lot of your own first-round picks. We got a Lauri Markkanen over here. Like, Smart's salary would be a part of that conversation, Santi Aldama, all that sort of thing, and I think Memphis would most certainly listen. But I think that they believe in Smart's versatility. I think they believe in his leadership. One of the biggest things when you hear, we talked about over on Locked On Grizzlies, when Xavier Tillman Sr. was traded to the Boston Celtics. Happy, I'm sure, that he was traded because he won an NBA championship. He talked about how it was so professional and businesslike. He mentioned the maturity of the Boston Celtics. That culture was established by Marcus Smart. Like, he wasn't there anymore, but Marcus Smart was the main reason that was built. And Marcus Smart, he's not there in Memphis to be a babysitter, but he is there to be someone to show a young core how to win, because they haven't won at the level that Marcus Smart has won at. Now, that's not going to make Marcus Smart the leader of the organization. That's Ja Morant. That's Jaren. That's Dez. But I do think that they are going to look to Smart as that de facto vet that is going to be able to come in and make those winning plays when it matters most. They have pieces behind Smart that are so versatile. We've talked a lot about Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson. G.G. can play the 3. I think he proved that this past season. Now, can he do it as a winning team for 32 minutes? No, he hasn't proven that. But can he do it as a reserve, scoring and defending in 12 to 14-minute spurts? I think he can. I think he's shown that capacity. So they have players in the wings, literally, that can fill that void for Smart if there's a size concern. But Marcus Smart, as you alluded to, plays so much bigger than his actual listed size. And I do think that there is value in what Smart brings to a culture of an organization. They don't need a third or fourth scorer. To me, Jaren Jackson Jr. proved he can be that guy this past season. Desmond Bane has shown time and again he can score 20-some points. They need a guy that can be the glue piece that brings it all together and makes those winning plays and shows the others the way in terms of how to get there. It's almost like Tayshaun Prince back when he was traded to Memphis and they went on that Western Conference Finals run over a decade ago now. Tayshaun was not the best player. It wasn't even Tayshaun Prince's prime. He was arguably past his prime at that point. But he was that glue piece that made everything else kind of work. And I don't know that Memphis needs that stud 3 at this time. They need someone to help facilitate and make Ja and Dez and Jaren shine. If Smart shows that he can't be that guy, then I think trades will be explored. But again, the 9 games they played together, they were 6-3. And that was without Steven Adams, who the team clearly thought they were going to have because he played in preseason basketball games. So they didn't have their starting center. They now have, again, when Steven Adams plays against the Memphis Grizzlies, he's going to line up against something he usually doesn't see, a center that is bigger than him, in the 7'4", 300-pound Zach Edey. That's going to matter. We've seen this Grizzlies team with a good, true center have a lot of success in the Western Conference. I think we're going to get some revisiting with that, and Smart will be a big piece of it. And if he's not, then maybe we hear more trade rumors kicking up around Christmas. Your
bold prediction, Joe, in terms of this squad, I guess it's bold. It's on the mild side of bold, but again, that suits your predilection for Kansas City barbecue over Memphis and the general spiciness of the South there. You said that you think that Ja Morant will make an All-NBA team. Now, I guess it is a little bold because it is bloody hard to get into that top 15 player group in the NBA. I think you're right in terms of Morant being at least in that mix, and people do forget the sort of value that he can provide. It's going to require probably a few little things from Ja to be there is consistently be available, turn into a more deadly off the dribble shooter, which he hasn't really been to that level of some of those other guys. It's a hard field to get, but we're talking about a situation again with all NBA teams that are positionless now. So there is a real chance for Ja to get into that zone. So I'm interested. That's an interesting pick. I think it's got a big possibility, and I want to see it happen. But what I do want to hear from you now, Joe, is your team record prediction. We know that this team didn't even crack 30 wins last season. So I don't know if you remember exactly the number you wrote down to me when you said your prediction.
I think I do.
I've got it here for you. I'll tell you what it is. Okay,
please.
Let's go. What do you think you put down as your win total?
I want to say I had 53 wins.
Joe Mullinax had 53 wins for the Memphis Grizzlies, correct. 53-29, and last season through all of the NBA in terms of wins and the way that Vegas was setting the lines, we had multiple teams beat their over-unders by 10, 12, 15, or come under them by 10, 12, 15. Now, Memphis's line is not going to be set where they were last season, but 53 is a big number. That is rarefied air. That is, let's say, top 2 in the West. Is that sort of where you're sitting, thinking they're going to be?
I think if they had 53 wins this past season, they would have been the 4 seed because you had the Thunder, the Wolves, and the Nuggets, if I remember correctly. Those are the top 3.
They were the top 3.
I struggle with seeing, we talked about Memphis not having as bad of injury luck. The Thunder had no injuries.
No,
it's really hard
neither did Minnesota, really,
to believe that both of those teams, especially, but Oklahoma City, to go through a season, and I don't want to wish that on anybody. Trust me, as a podcaster who covered the injury-riddled Memphis Grizzlies in the smallest market in the NBA, it could have been a better year for DeMichael Cole, my co-host, and myself. But it's about being realistic. The Memphis Grizzlies probably will have an injury or two, but so will the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you're being honest and you say, oh, well, is Ja Morant durable enough to make it through? Okay, well, you have to apply that same kind of logic to other teams. You can't assume health for one team and then not for another.
I agree completely.
I think the Denver Nuggets are doing some interesting things, and they're very scared of the second apron in terms of the luxury tax. And Nikola Jokic is the undisputed best player on the planet. I'm not going to disparage him in any way, shape, or form. They're putting a lot of bets on guys that I wouldn't be as confident filling in the void. I think Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is being a bit undervalued in terms of what he brought to the Nuggets. The Phoenix Suns are very top-heavy. How are they going to respond if they have to deal with an injury? So Memphis being the 3 seed-ish, give or take a spot, I could see them settling at 4, could see them settling at 2. I don't see them being a play-in team. The lowest I would see them is a 6 situation. If they're a play-in team, something's gone wrong. And I do think it's fair to start saying, if they're a play-in team, is Taylor Jenkins the right head coach for this team? Because
there's your bold prediction. There's your bold one.
It's winning time. right? And I
It
love
is.
Taylor Jenkins. People have been calling for Taylor Jenkins' head for 2 years. Even when they were winning 56 games, there were fans in Memphis that wanted him fired because they thought he wasn't good enough for the playoffs. The 6-19 without Ja during the suspension made me nervous. FedEx Forum used to be a place where Memphis was the best home basketball team in the league, and they bombed in that way last season. That makes me nervous. They've completely restructured the coaching staff. Like 5 of the assistants have been let go. There's going to be some different looks from Memphis this year, especially offensively. I think that he kind of knows that this is a year that he has to have some success. That urgency, the familiarity that these guys are going to have. Again, the Thunder were fairly familiar with one another. The Timberwolves most certainly were familiar with one another. Same thing with Denver. The Grizzlies have that going into next season, and I could very easily see them being a 53-ish win, 3-5 seed or 2-4 seed, kind of team in the West.
Last thing, Joe, I haven't given you preparation for this. We're coming in raw on it. I've got a question.
I like it.
I've got a question for you, a quiz question for you. In the Grizzly,
Oh, gosh.
we're heading into the 24-25 NBA season. There have been 16 players in Grizzlies history who have worn the number 24 or 25. That extends also back to Vancouver. A, do you know any of them? And B, if you do, who's your favorite player for the Grizzlies who have worn 24 or 25?
Dylan Brooks wore 24.
I said favorite, though.
He might be my favorite. Dylan Brooks kind of gets a bad rep, to be honest with you. I think a lot of what Dylan became in Memphis was created by the Memphis Grizzlies. If you remember when he got drafted, that was a bad Grizzlies team. The year before Jaren Jackson Jr. got drafted, before the lottery became what it is now, they were the 4th worst team in the NBA, and Dylan had to eat a lot of that. It was Dylan that played a lot of bad basketball, and he has the mentality that he saw himself as a core player for the Memphis Grizzlies, and he wasn't, and he's not now, but I can't fault him for kind of seeing himself that way. I like Dylan. I'm not going to say I like Chandler Parsons. He was 25.
He was.
I liked the signing of Chandler Parsons at the time. That was one of my first big articles over at Grizzly Bear Blues in SB Nation days. I wrote about why Memphis should sign Chandler Parsons, and it went a little mini viral in Memphis. And then they signed Chandler Parsons, and that looks really bad historically now. But those are 2 of the ones. I'll know I know those 2. Did Tayshaun Prince wear 25?
No, he didn't. But
No, he was 21. He was 21.
There was a player that wore 24 and 25 last season. And this is just going to bring this whole show full circle. 24 was Lamar Stevens, but 25, Joe, it was the GOAT, Malginha Pereira. And
I figured you were going with Pereira, yeah.
And that is where we will end the show today, Joe. Thank you for coming on, chatting Memphis Grizzlies with me. Tell us what people are going to see if they are everydayers over at Locked On Grizzlies.
Sure. You're going to see DeMichael Cole and I talking about the possible rotation pairings. A lot of the stuff I talked about, G.G. Jackson. We're going to talk Grizzlies rivalries going into the season. The Pelicans, is that a thing moving forward? The Warriors, that's another team that maybe will fall back a little bit depending on what happens with the Markkanen situation. So DeMichael Cole, who is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, the newspaper website, he's a tremendous partner of mine. I think we have really good chemistry, and it's a great chance to get to know a little bit more about a team that maybe you don't know as much about. Because again, as someone that lived in Memphis for several years, and now I live back where I'm from in Virginia, people kind of find out what I do in my hobby, my side hustle. And like, oh yeah, I forgot the Grizzlies are an NBA team. I hear that weekly. So if you're not as familiar with Memphis and the Grizzlies, it's a wonderful way to get a little bit more in touch. I think they're going to remind people this year that they are one of the top 10 or so teams in the National Basketball Association. And Locked On Grizzlies is a great way to get to know them a little bit better.
I think they're going to find that out pretty quickly this season, Joe, and then you'll get all that information for the Grizzlies from Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you again for coming on the show and chatting about Memphis.
Thanks for having me. Anytime, Josh.
And that is the end of the show today. I don't remember if I said this at the start of the show, but I'll say it now. I was supposed to be releasing the Chicago Bulls team preview first, but because I'm an idiot and I've changed some of the settings here, I recorded the whole show, and my guest, Hayes from Locked On Bulls, his audio didn't come through. I could hear him fine. It just didn't record. So I've got half a show, so we're going to have to reschedule that and do it at another time. But in order so that you're not an idiot like me and you never miss things, you got to subscribe, you got to thumb up, you got to leave those comments down below, YouTube style, audio style, whatever style you want. Do it right now. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.